Okay. I want to ask you to imagine something first. So picture yourself driving a fast car on this delightfully winding, narrow road in the mountains. Suddenly, there is another car emerging from a bend ahead that's zooming as fast as you, but coming in the opposite direction. Now, you and the other driver have to quickly decide what you will do without being able to explicitly communicate your intentions to one another. And what you may want to do depends on how you think the other driver will react to the situation. If the other driver will slow down and swerve to a side, creating sufficient space for you on the road to force through, you might as well push on without accelerating yourself. But of course, if the other driver thinks alike, the result can be disastrous. So stylized and simplified, this is what's known as the game of chicken. The one who dares to push on wins, and the one who swerves loses. What makes it a game of chicken are drivers' competing motives. Each driver prefers to swerve when the other pushes on because they want to avoid a collision, but at the same time, each is tempted to push on when the other swerves. So juggling these competing motives, a temptation to win on the one hand, and the need to avoid a collision on the other hand, the question is, how should drivers coordinate their actions? Game theory, which studies such mixed motive games, says that drivers should choose their actions in a way such that neither is tempted to deviate from their action, given what the other is doing. Now, there are two combinations of drivers' actions in this game that have this characteristic. In game theoretic jargon, there are two Nash equilibria in the game. And one driver here should push on and the other should swerve. But from each individual driver's standpoint, it is not clear who should push on and who should swerve. So game theory and this standard notion of Nash equilibrium that comes from game theory is not very helpful for the drivers who need to quickly decide what to do in the game. Yet, despite this apparent challenge in coordination of actions, it is quite easy to predict what drivers will do in these encounters. It is very likely that both will slow down and swerve to pass one another efficiently and safely. And this constitutes a compromise whereby neither driver attempts to outsmart the other by exploiting a predicted cooperative maneuver such that the other will swerve to personally benefit from it. So I should push on. So they are happy to compromise and both swerve. Behavioral game theorists, as opposed to theoretical game theorists, behavioral game theorists study people's actual behaviors in these mixed motive scenarios in labs using money to incentivize people's decisions. So in a standard experiment with the chicken game, a participant would earn the most money if she dares to push on when the other swerves, and correspondingly less in other outcomes of the game, for example, earn nothing in a crash. Now, in these experiments, the majority of participants swerve, and many of them do so when they predict the other to swerve as well. Why people opt for this cooperative compromise, which is mutually beneficial, but which is worse than they can earn for themselves if they were to defect, if they were to push on, or in other words, why don't many people defect when they predict the other to swerve, is an ongoing debate. Some theories suggest that we tacitly cooperate with others because we dislike unequal winner-loser outcomes. So we prefer, when we interact with others, outcomes that are equal for us than to outcomes that are unequal. So according to this view, drivers don't actually perceive their interaction as a game of chicken. This is because the drivers don't like the outcome in which they win and the other loses to the outcome where they go past one another safely and efficiently. So a matter of swerving here by both drivers is not really a matter of a compromise, but it's a matter of equality. People prefer the outcome which is equal to the outcome which is unequal. Now, one important thing follows from this. even if one driver's hands were tied, let's say the blue driver's hands were tied, in such a way that pushing on were not a real option they could take. Imagine some rigid automatic braking system in their car, for example, that prevents them to push on when there is another car approaching from the opposite direction. So even when that's the case, and even when the other driver, the red driver, knows that that is the case, the red driver will still swerve, because they still prefer equality to inequality. They do not like the outcome in which they win and the other loses, to the outcome where they pass one another more equally. Now, such unconditional aversion to inequity is certainly a very real trait for us humans, and it abounds. Think, for example, of people's individual donations to charities to reduce economic inequality. That is explained quite well by our kind of willingness to be inequity averse, by our tendency to be inequity averse. However, it doesn't seem to give a complete story of why we cooperate with others in these interactive scenarios, such as the game of chicken. And a good example of that are two other extensively studied games, the game of trust and the game of dictator. In the game Trust, which is shown here in the diagram on the left, two players make choices sequentially. There are three possible outcomes of the game, and the numbers at each of the three outcomes are payoffs to the first and the second player respectively. So the red number is the payoff to the red player, player one, and the blue number is the payoff to the blue player, player two. Now, the first player in the game chooses between a safe and a risky option. The safe option is to split a small prize equally between the two players and end the game right there. The risky option is to give a chance, is to take a chance with cooperation, to pass the decision to the other player. Now, the second player, if given a chance, then chooses between a cooperative and a selfish outcome. The cooperative option C is to split a larger prize equally between both players, but the selfish option D, which stands for defect as opposed to cooperate, allows that player to pocket an even higher personal payoff at the first player's expense. So it only pays for the first player to cooperate, to pass the decision to the second player, if she trusts that the second player will respond in kind. In the game Dictator, which is shown here on the right, only one player makes a decision. And that player's choices, the cooperative and selfish outcome, are exactly the same as the choices available to the second player in the game of Trust. So what makes the two games particularly interesting compared side by side is that the game Dictator is essentially the game of trust in which the first player's hands are tied. It's as if the first player has been forced to cooperate, and simply the second player just merely chooses between the two outcomes of the game. Now, in experiments with these games, and these experiments have been conducted many times over in all kinds of variations of these games, so these are quite robust results. In experiments with these games, the majority of people choose to cooperate in the game Trust, both in the role of player one and the role of player two. But the majority in the game Dictator choose to defect. They choose to pocket higher payoff for themselves. So inequity aversion cannot explain this. This is because the outcomes that the second player chooses in both games are exactly the same. So that one outcome is equal, the other one outcome is unequal, and they're identical. So if inequity aversion were the sole reason why we cooperate with others in interactive settings, these proportions of people who cooperate in the role of player two should be the same, but they're not. Now, what explains people's differential willingness to cooperate in the two games is the fact that in the game of Trust, the first player has a choice, but in the game Dictator, she has not. When the first player decides what to do in Trust, she needs to trade off values. She needs to trade off personal security, the chance to guarantee herself a decent payoff, and then the game right there, and the opportunity to seek mutually beneficial result in the game. The opportunity to seek the result where both players gain more. So in effect, she needs to, on the fly, decide what objective in the game she's going to pursue. Should I pursue my personal interest in the game, or should I pursue our mutual interest in the game? So these are competitive objectives which she needs to internally negotiate within herself and come to a conclusion what she's going to do. What will be her goal? If she decides to take on the objective, the pursuit, which is the pursuit of mutual interest, and cooperates, see, she effectually sends the second player a message. Let's compromise. It's as if she's saying, I hereby, sorry, what's the word? I will undergo my safety, my personal safety. And in response to that, you should choose the objective, which is the pursuit of our mutual interests as well. And knowing that, the second player in the game might say, okay, and choose the objective, which is the pursuit of mutual interests rather than their personal interests. Since in the game Dictator, the first player does not have an opportunity to make trade-off values, does not have an opportunity to choose objectives and to offer a compromise to the second player, the second player's decision to cooperate there does not constitute a settlement on a compromise in the same way in which it doesn't trust. It's rather an act of selfless altruism or inequity aversion, for that matter. And evidently, as this behavioral data suggests, altruism is a less prevalent trait among humans than our willingness to compromise with others. So after this long introduction, just one point. With these empirical findings in mind, now recent theories, new theories about why people cooperate have emerged in game theory, and these theories basically suggest that we often cooperate with others because we choose our objectives on the fly. And we do that, we choose the objective for mutual interest because we recognize that we need to reciprocally sacrifice some of our personal interests in order to attain mutually beneficial results. So we do that because we expect others are doing the same thing. So now, after this long introduction, I'll come to artificial agents. So equipped with these theories and behavioral findings, we can ask, how willing will humans be to tacitly cooperate with artificial agents if one day we will socially interact with them? Now, this is not far-fetched science fiction if the prospect of us having to share roads with self-driving cars is an imminent reality, as many people predict. Differently from our other uses of intelligent machines, such as, let's say, Google Translate, a self-driving car is particularly unique because it will not be a mere tool we use to perform specific tasks for us. A robo-taxi, a self-driving car, a robo-taxi will be a tool for passengers who use it as a means of transportation, but it will also be an autonomous agent with whom other humans, other human drivers, cyclists, pedestrians will be negotiating traffic on the road. So whether human drivers will be willing to tacitly cooperate with a robo-taxi on the road depends on how they will perceive the interactions to be like. Will they perceive these interactions to be more like the mixed motive games of trust and chicken, in which both parties make value trade-offs and in which they might switch from one objective to another on the expectation that others do so reciprocally? Or will they perceive these interactions more like games of dictator, in which the humans are dictators and self-driving cars are just in the position to do whatever that they are doing? There is reason to believe that the latter is more likely. Now, first, there is a technical issue. An artificial agent, which most prominently epitomized today as a decision-making system that is powered by machine learning, simply cannot choose its own objectives. What is important here is it cannot choose its own ultimate objectives in deciding what to do. Whatever it is tasked to do, it needs to have a specified objective. So in a road game such as Chicken, this might be the attainment of mutually beneficial outcomes that are good for it and other human traffic participants on the road. Or it might be the pursuit of selfish outcomes, for example, the speediest delivery of its passengers. It might be even tasked to deliver the for the speediest delivery, so long as nobody else gets hurt. But whatever while such objective would require human drivers to really face and make value trade-offs on the spot on the road, any of these value trade-offs would have to have been resolved for that self-driving car somehow in advance. So with that in mind, For us humans, once we have formed an expectation about what the self-driving car or artificial agent has been ultimately programmed to pursue in our interactions, or if we have learned what that objective is through our interaction with it over time, once we've settled that question, we are in the position of the player of the role of a dictator, because we know what these self-driving cars are ultimately trying to attain in our interactions, and then we decide which outcomes we will allow them, which outcomes we will allow us both to achieve, essentially like in the game Dictator. Now, the second point is a political issue, and it's related to the first one. The dominant and much publicized view today is that artificial agents should be unconditionally benevolent. Human interests and safety always must come first. Now, this grounds the expectation that in socially interactive settings, artificial agents will be unconditionally cooperative when humans are involved. And indeed, imagine how scandalous it would be if one day you picked up a newspaper and you read a headline that here is a fleet of self-driving cars, here's a fleet of robo-taxis that's been programmed to exploit cooperative humans on the road for their selfish goals. For example, the speediest delivery of goods or passengers for that matter. Indeed, that would seem to be quite uncomfortable to us. So that leads us to a conundrum. On the one hand, we want artificial agents to cooperate with us. It would be lamentable if the introduction of AI into our society disrupted some patterns of mutual cooperation simply because AI do not cooperate with humans where humans normally do. But on the other hand, if it's true that we often tacitly cooperate with others because we choose our objectives on the fly, and we do that reciprocally with the expectation that others do so too, we should expect less cooperation from us with cooperative AI agents than with cooperative humans. So if humans perceive AI agents as utility maximizing entities that are out there to meet some specified objective, we are in the seat of the dictator, and we know that in that seat we cooperate with others less than in the seat when others choose their own objectives in these games. Some recent experiments on human interaction suggest that this prediction might actually be true. Behavioral scientists recently shown that in repeated interactions between humans and AI, in various social dilemma games similar to those of the game of chicken, artificial agents can induce cooperative behavior from humans when humans don't know whether they interact with a human or an intelligent machine. When that is made transparent, when humans know that they interact with a machine, they cooperate with artificial agents significantly less than they cooperate with humans. And recently, my collaborators and I conducted some empirical studies of our own, and this will soon be published as well. We were interested to study how willing humans will be, to trust, take risks, and cooperate with artificial agents in various social dilemma scenarios, including the games of trust and chicken that I described before. And our two key findings are these. In these interactions, people generally trust, they predict that artificial agents will be as cooperative with them as humans, and that's shown here in the top panel. But when they predict artificial agents to cooperate with them, significantly fewer humans cooperate with artificial agents than they cooperate with humans, with other humans. So here you can see the role of player 2 in the game trust, in the chicken, and in some other games, that drop in cooperation with AI is quite stark and significant. So what to do? So clearly this shows that this might be an expected challenge, an expected challenge to the introduction of AI agents into our social interactions, such as driving on the road. So here are four possible ways forward that we might want to consider. One is that we may want to avoid encounters with artificial agents in mixed motive social dilemmas, such as chicken. Now, this might be possible in some domains, but as the driving game of chicken shows, it might be very difficult to achieve on roads. The second option might be, and this is probably the most difficult option, is to develop artificial agents that are actually capable of altering their own objectives on the fly and choosing their ultimate objectives. Now, even if this were technically possible, it's questionable whether we want to forge an artificial agent who could potentially agonize over the dilemma of whether they should pursue their selfish interests or mutual interests in interactions with us humans. So it's not sure whether we even would like to do that, even if it is possible to do that. The third option is to abandon transparency. And this is a workable solution, especially in our interactions online, where we don't really know who are we interacting with. So abandoning transparency means to make humans believe that they interact with other humans when in actual fact they interact with machines. Perhaps even with self-driving cars, this might be possible if we remove all indicators that these are self-driving cars on roads and add tinted windows on them such that you can't see the driver inside. So abandoning transparency might restore this mutual cooperation between us and artificial agents, but this will undoubtedly raise some ethical objections. And the fourth option might be the simplest. And this might be that we simply don't want to socially interact with intelligent machines. So on the roads, for example, perhaps we should just segregate us from robo-taxis and self-driving cars. We should have separate lanes for humans and separate lanes for robots, and merely not interact with one another at all. For if we will never cooperate with them, then they will not be very useful modes of transportation as well. They will just be forever stuck in traffic while we sort of zoom past. So that's all I wanted to say. I thank my collaborators in this project, and I thank you all also for your attention. No.
Excellent. If you unshare your screen, then we can, or you can still leave it on there. It's like we can see more of you, which is good. Thank you for the exciting talk. We already have questions coming in. One is, I'll quote, thinking about potential devices which might, oh no, this was from Anna Strasser previously, sorry. Well-being question. So then let me start us off. So the one question I had in mind is, you said, okay, we don't know whether we should, the AI systems are capable of, what is it, what's corporate behavior? Corporate objectives. Compromise objectives. There was something with objectives in there.
Choose their own objectives.
You said they're not capable. Choose their own objectives, exactly. I was wondering whether we could somehow train them to be cooperative and non-cooperative in certain situations. So you could make them, a bit more, some is still transparent, but it's like a bit untransparent, see where I'm going?
Yeah.
Or
so, yeah, so maybe one way is to make them a bit unpredictable.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine something like that happening in interactions on the road. Right? So you would not like somebody who is unpredictable in that way on the road. It's still an objective that the self-driving car pursues, right? So it's still, it is not itself negotiating internally about which objective to pursue. So we'll adapt to that behavior, sure. I mean, if a self-driving car is not cooperative on the road with us, well, we'll drive very carefully and safely because we will know that self-driving cars never give way to humans, But I doubt that we will allow them to join the roads in the first place, at least in the mixed traffic kind of scenario, right? The point, I guess, that I was trying to make is that we often do cooperate with other humans. So it's actually, our behavior is quite predictable to each other in these social scenarios often. We expect others to cooperate, and we cooperate as ourselves as well. But the reason why we do that, that's important. We do that because we recognize that if we do not cooperate with each other, well, that will lead to some unfortunate outcomes for us all. So we compromise in these social interactions. I will cooperate with you knowing that you will cooperate with me for that same reason. The fact that we sort of choose to compromise because pursuing our selfish interests leads to bad outcomes for us both. So if we introduce unpredictable cars on the roads, well, just by sheer definition of that, cooperation is going to decrease, right? And it's not clear whether we would like to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had another question. I was thinking about, okay, we always talk about human AI, human car interaction. Does cooperation then emerge in purely AI interaction cases? When you would segregate human driving and AI driving, you think in the AI system world, does that cooperation emerge, or can actually this dictator behavior be realized as well, where you would have more pushy systems and actually systems which are more cooperative, and that would be then emerge some equilibrium where would not be, you can have a training environment where you have multi-agent systems, and at some point there, there's this one system that has the right equilibrium in cooperative and non-cooperative behavior.
Well, yeah, I mean, if self-driving cars don't interact with any humans on the roads and they just interact amongst themselves, then the solution is pretty simple. You just make them cooperative. So you make them to always seek mutually beneficial results when they interact between themselves. And you can make them very efficient and very safe and so on. And so all these points that developers of self-driving cars talk about, why we are introducing them on roads. You could program that into them, right? I mean, self-driving cars, a fleet of robo-taxis could even probably operate in some swarm-like behavior, right? So which would probably increase the efficiency of transport system overall. So that's all there. But in that case, you don't need to worry about non-cooperative humans trying to exploit these self-driving cars for their own personal benefit, right? So if you don't allow humans to enter these interactions. So so the answer is, you just program them to cooperate. You don't need to worry too much about how they will reach cooperation. You just make them cooperate.
Yeah, but you could also let them learn to cooperate, you see? So in a way you give them, okay, go from A to B, then you would have some variable in cooperation level. And then from there you would figure out, okay, what is the, right amount of cooperation in that way, which could then mirror somehow human level of cooperation. So that you sometimes do cooperate, sometimes you don't.
Well, yeah. Of course, self-driving cars can learn things, but you need to specify to them what they are trying to learn to do, right? And in these, what these game theoretic social dilemmas show is that in these games, there are different types of objectives which you might be learning to pursue. Your objective might be always try to maximize your personal payoff. Or your objective might be always look for mutually beneficial outcomes, right? So these are two different objectives. So a self-driving car needs to have one of these objectives given, and then it can learn how best to achieve it, right? So if self-driving cars interact just between themselves, you tell them, well, my objective to you is to seek mutually beneficial, efficient way of passing one another in traffic when you interact with self-driving cars. And then, it can learn itself how to do that. So that's fine.
Okay, we have one question coming up in the chat. Do you think it likely that time and experience with AI will lead to more trust and better cooperation between AI and human drivers?
Well, so AI cars, they will, on the one hand, we can look at self-driving car. So a self-driving car will adapt to human drivers. let's say, right? So if human drivers are not cooperative, self-driving car will try to adapt to that. If human drivers are cooperative, self-driving car will try to adapt to that, whatever objective it has been tasked to pursue. As for humans, well, that's the kind of the challenge that's emerging. Because if humans with experience learn that self-driving cars are unconditionally benevolent and are unconditionally cooperative, a self-driving car will always give you way if you push on. Then the opposite is probably likely to occur. Once we learn and become comfortable that self-driving cars are very safe and they always give priority to humans, that we can exploit them. So I would say that the opposite will emerge. Not mutual cooperation, but less cooperation from us with self-driving cars over time.